is resurrection power that has the power to change your life and my life. And the power that Jesus shows is power that is released from the enemy, from being in the clutches of the enemy, and now being brought into his love and care. One of Satan's greatest tactics in the world today to keep you and I in bondage is this word, shame. Shame is the single greatest powerful emotion that involves feelings of embarrassment, disgrace, or humiliation that stems from a belief that one has done something wrong, that you have violated either a social norm or a moral code or your own personal shortcomings, mistakes, or failures. I mean, you ever hang out with a friend and your friend totally shames you? Like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, that odd person, that's always saying the weird things. And then you get shamed for that. There are many times in our life where we feel shame. And when we feel the shame, we start to cower inward. When you're shameful, it's not like you go out and flaunt it to everybody. Oh, hey, everybody, look at me. I just did the worst thing ever. No. Robbers, stealers, liars, cheats, no matter who you are, if you've done something wrong, the automatic response is to cower in shame. And the enemy wants to define you by your scars. That's what the enemy does. And many people in this room, if you're not free from that, you're going to live the rest of your life identifying with your worst mistakes. Case in point, in today's day and age, we see this happen all the time. Social media, out in the world, everywhere. Do you know what's really big in today's world? Cancel culture. Have you heard of that? So many people are getting canceled right now, and some people deserve to be. I mean, right now, this whole week, the whole news was P. Diddy. And I don't know, something that he did, and I don't know what the whole news is about, but he's getting canceled. That's what happened. Last year, it was, who's that Yeezy guy? Kanye, that's it. I don't even know my names. The Yeezy, whatever. Oh. He was canceled last year. He lost $1 billion in a day because he got canceled. And the thing is, today we like to shame people publicly and personally, and so we cower in shame, and the enemy wants to define you by your scars. But the good news of the gospel is that you are not defined by your scars. You're defined by his scar on the cross. And that's who we need to identify with, not your worst mistake. And so this is what happens when you're in shame. I looked it up and I found that there are 10 results that happen professionally. These are psychologists who tell others, they did the study and they said, these are the results of shame. A person has low self-esteem. A person isolates and withdraws themselves. They go through depression and anxiety. They also start, this thing with perfectionism, and they have avoidance behaviors. I mean, just read down the list. They go into destructive coping mechanisms. Dude, the list is endless when you and I live in shame. We can't live freely, but we kind of cower in our own shame. And at the end, look at number 10. It creates this cycle of shame. So meaning, As you feel shamed about something, then you go into depression and anxiety. Sometimes you overcompensate by trying to be perfect. And then you know what ends up happening? The cycle goes on and on, because you and I know we can't be perfect. But we try to cover up that shame. And then so in our perfectionism, it cycles back to shame and more shame and more shame. Do you see how this never ends? Shame never ends. And this is where the enemy wants to grab you. He wants to grab you in the pit of shame. And this is where we see today's scripture come to life. Peter, the gentleman that we're going to be talking about, he was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. And if you know anything about Peter's life, his life was filled with a lot of shame. He would say things, he would blurt out things that were just really awkward. Jesus, in a crowd of 15,000 people, he asked the disciples asked, hey, Jesus, what are we going to do about feeding these people? They're hungry. And then Jesus is like, you go ahead and do it. And Peter's like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I mean, there were so many times where Peter went through moments of shame. But there was none other time where he was in the worst shame. His worst mistake was actually something he did this past Thursday. It would be called Holy Thursday. And on the night that Jesus was betrayed, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And it says in the scripture, we read it on Good Friday. Any of you who have been here for Good Friday service, we read the passage in Mark where Peter was warming himself in front of a charcoal fire. And a woman said, hey, you look oddly familiar. You're one of that guy, Jesus' disciples, right? And he was like, no, you got the wrong man. That's not me. And then another person comes and says, hey, you're one of his disciples, right? He's like, no. And he started calling curses on himself. And then finally, the third person comes and says, yeah, you're a Galilean. I know you. You were with that guy, Jesus. And I mean, he just says, no, I'm not. And then all of a sudden, the rooster crows. Cock-a-doodle-doo. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was really well played out. Maybe you should stand next to me next time and give the sermon with me. And he cried so bitterly. He started to turn inward like this person's picture. I believe he was depressed. He started isolating himself. So much so that on Sunday morning, he said to the guys, I'm going out to go fishing. Stay back. I need some time alone. And his disciples wouldn't leave him alone. And so this is now where we find our story this morning when we look at the Bible in John chapter 21. And in verse 15, Peter had gone out all night to go fishing because that's what he knew. Before Jesus called him into discipleship, he was a fisherman. That's what his profession was. And now that Jesus was dead, what is he going to do? I'm just going to go back to my old life. Yeah, these past 3 years with Jesus, feeding 5,000 people, watching the blind see, watching the lame walk. Yeah, that was fun, but you know what? Now that he's gone and I have done the worst thing that I ever could do, which is deny Jesus 3 times, I'm going to go back fishing. So he goes to fish one night and he doesn't catch anything. But there's this odd-looking figure on the shore. And this odd-looking figure, which they can't make out, yells out from the shore, hey guys, have you caught any fish last night? And Peter and his friends are like, no, we caught nothing. Because we know without Jesus, you can do nothing. And then so this mysterious figure calls out and says, hey, y'all put the net on the other side. I mean, it's kind of like you take a net on the boat, you put it on the other side. I mean, what's the point? You didn't catch anything all night. Why just do this one motion? He does it. And in obedience, they haul a catch of fish that is so large. And it actually has a number, 153 fishes, and the nets were about to break. I mean, that's how many fish were just in there, in those nets. And then that's when John, the disciple, points out to Peter and says, "That's our teacher. That's Jesus." And then Peter takes off and puts on his robe. He jumps out of the boat. He's swimming to the shore as fast as he can because he wants to see his master Peter wants to see his master Jesus. And Jesus says this, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon, Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." When Jesus says, "Do you love me?" what is Jesus referring to? Is Jesus talking about his fellow disciples? Maybe he's talking about that bonfire that Jesus creates? No, you know what I believe? I believe he's looking at the massive catch of fish. And Jesus is asking Peter, "Do you love me more than you love your career? More than you love the money that can come in for you? More than all the things that I can do for you? Do you love me more than that?" And Peter says, "Yes, you know that I love you." And so what does Jesus say? "Feed my lambs." You know what's interesting? Jesus is not telling Peter, "Go back into fishing. That's what you're good at. That's what you do. Go back to your old way of life." That's not what he's doing. What Jesus is doing is he's inviting Peter. Although Peter denied him, he's inviting him to a new life, a new way of living. And instead of fishing and making money for fish, he says, "Feed my lambs." This is the new life that I invite you to. You know what's really encouraging about all this? Peter is considered, throughout the Gospels, he's considered one of those like bumbling idiots. He always shot his mouth with his foot. He always said the wrong things. He always made mistakes. He denied Jesus 3 times, yet Jesus is calling him to a new way of life. Do you know what that means for you and me? That means that Jesus does his greatest work with the least of his disciples. You don't have to be super smart. You don't have to be rich to follow Jesus. You don't have to have all the, all the accolades, and you don't have to have all these things put together to follow Jesus. Anyone, in any situation, no matter how bad your situation may be, anyone can follow Jesus. And that's what he's calling. He's calling the worst of sinners to follow him. Then secondly, we see in the next passage, we see in the next line, it says, "And Jesus said again, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And he answered, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' And so Jesus said, 'Take care of my sheep.'" You know what I love about this second part? He says, "Take care of my sheep." He says something different. Instead of saying, "Feeding my lambs," he says, "Take care of my sheep." What is he calling Peter towards? See, he knows that Peter was a fisherman. But remember when Jesus called Peter, he said, "I will make you fishers of men." You're no longer going to fish for a living. You know what I want you to do? I want you to take care of other people for a living. No matter how bad your life may have been, there's one thing about your life that you can do that God can use. Do you know what that is? You can help somebody else in this life. You can take care of God's sheep. We all are God's sheep. And no matter how many times you've messed up, and by the way, can I share with you that those who've messed up the most actually have a greater impact of helping those people with the same issues. Because you feel their pain. You know what they've been through. You know what it feels like to live in shame. And so those people end up being the most effective ministers of feeding his sheep. And then finally, sorry for the time, I'm going to finish with this. The last part of the verse, it says here, the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? You know, Jesus knows what he's doing. He doesn't ask questions arbitrarily. He purposely asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Do you know why? And I love this. You have to understand the scenario here. Jesus puts a charcoal fire in the middle. He's cooking the fish, and he asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? Why? Because Jesus is bringing Peter back to his worst mistake, where Peter denies Jesus 3 times in front of where? A charcoal fire. And Jesus recreates that scene once again to remind him. He doesn't oust him. He doesn't cancel him like society does cancel culture. He just simply asked 3 times, do you love me? And then he said, he was sad, and he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep once again. The power of this scripture verse is, and this is how he ends. He goes, very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and somebody else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter will glorify God. The third thing I want to share with you all is, what is Jesus inviting each and every one of us to? He invites, just like he's inviting Peter, what is he doing? He's saying, you're going to stretch your hands one day, and he's telling him this is how you're going to die. Do you know what Jesus is telling Peter? He's inviting Peter to become just like him. See, all Peter's life, it was all about him. It was all about his will. It was all about, that's why he made so many mistakes. Because it was his own life that he wanted to live. Now Jesus is inviting Peter to live a life like Jesus, which is complete surrender to the Father. Complete surrender, not to your will, but to his will. And this is where we see God's redemption in the life of someone like Peter, who messed up really bad. And no matter how much you might have messed up, he redeems Peter once again with this last line. Then Jesus said, follow me. Do you know why this is so important? Does anybody remember the first time Jesus meets Peter? Do you know the words he used to tell Peter? What did he say? He said, Peter, come follow me. And throughout the 3 years of his life, and with this ultimate betrayal, Jesus goes back to the beginning, and he says to Peter, just follow me. This morning, I want to share with each and every one of you that no matter what mistake you've ever made, no matter where you're in life right now, whether you feel on the deep low of the valley or whether you're high up in a mountaintop, what Jesus is calling each and every one of us towards is, come follow me. And when we're able to follow him, it's no longer our life that we live. And so we don't have to live in shame. We don't have to live in anxiety. We don't have to live cowering like some of the other people did. But now, because of the resurrection, we're able to live free. And we are able to live in the identity that Jesus Christ calls us towards. And so with that said, let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. And I believe that Jesus, really the power of the resurrection is that we don't have to live in shame anymore. Just like he reinstated Peter and he forgave Peter, we're able to live a new life. We're able to live a completely new life in Jesus Christ.